Hi everyone, and welcome to our session on building partnerships that work for Gen Z. We've already heard a little bit about this demographic this morning, and we know there's certainly not a monolith. And I'm joined here by Joey to talk all about it. Joey, you are the founder and CEO of SYLVAIN, and you work with brands to help them reach Gen Z all the time. But can you just take me back a little bit to why you founded your agency and how you've sort of placed culture at the heart of it?
Yeah, we started I just turned 41. We started when I was 25, so there's a lot of blind ambition and hubris involved in those decisions. But a big part of it was we wanted to have more impact in the world, and we wanted to move upstream to impact decisions earlier. But it was also because we worked at different companies and agencies at the time that just had toxic environments that weren't fun to be part of, and so we wanted to try and create a place where people felt like they could show up to work and be themselves and enjoy the experience and not go home and need to scream into a void for an hour before going to bed.
Yeah. And you've been doing some amazing work, not just with brands, but the culture that you built and internally that leads to this amazing work that you've been building. And one of the anchors for today's conversation is this idea that culture is the strategy. So, how a company structures itself and thinks about diversity and empathy and decision making is inseparable from how they and clients show up externally. And I want to come on to that, but I want to frame the conversation within the context of Gen Z. Now, you and I are both millennials, but It's fair to say you know quite a bit about Gen Z.
Elder millennial.
Elder millennial. I think I'm right in the middle. But Gen Z are probably the most hyper-connected demographic in history. From your point of view, what do you think brands and the clients that you work with are maybe getting wrong about Gen Z, or what are some of the wrong assumptions that come up time and time again?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of answers to this question, but I think, one of the biggest things is this idea of be fucking for real, BFFR, right? I think the conversations that you hear in talking with Gen Z employees at the company or going out and doing research with people is everything feels so performative.
Yeah.
The historical model of how companies would go out and have a conversation feels performative. And in the same way that someone, you or I, but certainly they would call out their friends for putting on a show on social media, but then the reality is you have one nice painted wall and the rest you have a mattress on the floor right behind the camera. I think the need to just be real, not to pretend everything is great or your product is going to do everything for someone is super, super important. I was talking to someone who manages a team of 10 Gen Z people last week at a wedding, and he was saying the biggest feedback that he's getting positive in his performance reviews is he's just saying things like, hey, we have to do this, it's gonna suck, but it's just part of it. And they're okay, you told me it's gonna suck, I'm happy to do it, as opposed to be this is gonna be great, and then you're drudging through something for a while.
So they really value that honesty and being part of the conversation as opposed to being talked at, and that applies to advertising too. But what other social and emotional needs are defining this generation?
Yeah, there's the conversation about work-life balance and growth, and a lot of these things seem to be pervading. There was a New York Times article last week about how the working conditions are sort of increasingly declining and Gen Z's unhappy at work. And you can being old, it's easy to be able to be kids these days don't want to work or whatever, but you can go through history, 1918, some 41-year-old person writing an article being kids these days don't want to work. That's a tale as old as time. I think the reality is that we've gone through a massive amount of change in the past 5 years. COVID, inflationary bubble, supply and demand crisis and talent acquisition. All of these things, tariffs, all of these things are happening, and they're sort of coming into the workforce. And while we're all trying to figure out what's going on, they're sort of being swung around in different directions, and they're not happy in the workplace. And so trying to figure out those things of what are their growth opportunities? Are you teaching them? That's what they're saying is the most important thing when they're looking for a job. Are you giving them the room to be able to be themselves and show up authentically without sort of force-fitting them into a box. Like, those things matter.
Yeah. And this is kind of a two-part question, but you've done some insight work and reports around Gen Z. So from like a brand perspective, what surprises you most? But also, you know, as someone that runs their own agency and works with Gen Zers, what surprises you most on that front too?
Yeah, I mean, Gen Z as a cohort is probably more diverse attitudinally than I think any previous cohort. And, you know, there's sort of always that push to say, like, the next generation is the most superlative X, Y, or Z thing. But the nature of the media environment that they've grown up in allows them to be, you know, there was a article recently about like the trend mill, like this constant pursuit of new trends and sort of like the swinging of the context window for them. And I think living in that environment allows them to say like, okay, I can be whatever I want. I can pick up this thing and that thing and mix and match and be whatever. And so the attitudinal break feels far greater than previous generations of, you know, doing this work for 20 years. Like, you can see how it comes through. At the same time, you know, in the pursuit of trying to be the most authentic version of yourself while you're figuring out whatever that means at, you know, 24 years old, I had no idea who I was and what I wanted to be. The pursuit of like finding a place that you feel like you fit in is the challenge, right? If you sort of categorize yourself in all of these new diverse ways, finding a place where you're like, I belong here is a big challenge. And I think that's where you consistently see like, oh, did this thing speak to me? Do I feel like I can belong? Are there like signals that I'm receiving socially in some capacity, whether through media, communications, the choices that a company makes in design? Like, is there something that's signaling that like I can identify with that thing and it can be part of my identity?
Yeah, and you're so right, like that trend whiplash that they have is so real. Like last summer it was brat summer and then we went straight into like mindful demure fall. And it can give you whiplash. So if you're in the midst of it...
Soft girl winter.
Soft girl winter, life of a showgirl winter. Yeah, I don't know where we're at now. But yeah, it's hard to sort of thrive in that environment. But you know, bringing it back to the work you do with clients, like what do you see as some of the biggest challenges there? One of the sort of examples that I want you to talk about is the work that you've done with Hinge around helping them understand Gen Z. Can you talk me through that project?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of this requires sort of like paradigm shifting, right? It's a new generation that had an entirely different sort of experience than I had. They've had a lot of strange life experiences in the past 5 years, like I said. And what I think Hinge is so great at is they're so open-minded that they understood like, okay, like this new generation's concept of love, relationships, situationships, cuffing season, like all of these different ideas are so different than what millennials were. Like, we need to sort of from the ground up, like reevaluate what are we doing as a category.
Yeah.
Like the first work we did with them started at that point of like, categorically, what are we doing? Like, we're delivering love to people. What does that mean? What are they looking for? How are they talking about it? And the continued work we've done since then is saying like, okay, if we're shifting the product, if we're shifting the brand, what does that mean for monetization? What does that mean? How do we give them something that they would think is of enough value that they'd be willing to pay for it so that the company can continue to grow and deliver new things?
And as part of that work, you've done like an insights report with them around attitudes to love among Gen Z. That's right. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we did the LGBTQIA plus date report looking at like insights, and now there's a Gen Z one that is in process. And I mean, I think like some of it is things that you've heard from, you know, in conferences like this or from marketers or whatever about like fluidity. But one of the big things that the report opened up was like the pushback on labeling. There's been such a pursuit of identity politics for so long in creating sort of an environment that would be tolerant of people that, you know, had different sexuality, different gender norms, different ideas, like tolerant of ways to approach work, that now in that pursuit, all of a sudden people are like, well, I've labeled myself with like 17 things, but really what I'm just looking for is someone to love me, you know, like at the end of the day. And so I think that is like one example where that like whiplash from like going so far into identity politics and reaching a point where it's coming back. Like similarly, right, like the idea of like relationships and what do they want and fluidity and not lack of commitment, all these ideas that you sort of see in the media. Like there are new reports coming out from Field that are saying like the thing that Gen Z wants most is like old-fashioned monogamy. Like, you know.
So it's that tipping point, like cultural tipping point. And like, what does Gen Z expect, not just from Hinge, but from brands across the board today? Like, what's their expectation of brands and what turns them off?
I mean, it is that sort of like over-promising, under-delivering. Like, superlatives, I think, are like going to get you dragged by Gen Z. Like, the best, the most amazing, like, this will change your life, like all of those things. Like, there's an understanding that, you know, you are a service, you are a product, like, can you make my life incrementally better? Like, that's great, like, we can talk about that, but I don't think that if I'm, you know, switching laundry detergent or downloading a new app or whatever, that, like, at the end of this transaction, my life is going to be transformed. And I think, like, having that more realistic conversation, because they are, I mean, I think it's also impacted from the fact that they're existing in influencer media so much. And, you know, when TikTok was about to be sort of potentially shut down in America because of, you know, our politics, our chaos, there was this big wave of influencers being like, actually, I didn't use this product. Actually, I didn't think it was great. I just made this video. And everyone was sort of like airing their laundry. Like, I think that's a demonstration of them understanding, like, so much of this is fake. Like, can you just tell me, like, if I use this new detergent, I have to use less or I buy less? Or if I'm buying new light bulbs, they're more energy efficient and better for the environment. And like, that conversation, that realism, as opposed to like promising them a dream and under-delivering, is like what they're really looking for. Yeah,
and they pioneered like that original idea of de-influencing, which I love. So yeah, they don't like brands that like harness trends or speak to them at a surface level. So with this in mind, I'm keen to hear about the internal culture that you're building that sort of avoids that and results in better work for Gen Z. So why does internal culture matter when trying to speak to Gen Zers?
Yeah, I mean, like, your culture is your product at the end of the day. Like, whether you're in software, whether you're in hardware, whether you're delivering a service, like, the experience of delivering that, your ability to, like, speed to market, your ability to adjust, like, all of those things are born out of your culture. Like, you can see the waves and spikes in, you know, Vox Media had this podcast series called, like, The Land of Giants, and they, like, dug into major tech companies, and the Google one stuck with me because, like, they started from this, like, place where they called it like a tech playground, and they were like making things out of Legos to like read books and whatever because it was fun and experimental, and they were just doing their own thing. And like the environment today, like you read anywhere, is like everyone's scared. Everyone's afraid of their boss. Everyone's worried about being fired. They're not sure where it's going. They're not sure if they're aligning with the company, all of these different things. Like, there's two types of purpose alignment within organizations. There's like purpose camaraderie and purpose understanding. And I think if you build a culture where people feel like they can show up, like, no matter how diverse you build your team, if you force them to operate in the identical way, that you have a diverse monoculture, you have to build it to where you're dealing with and tolerating people showing up with different perspectives because the work gets better. Ideas are better when you have more diverse, like in AI terms, if you have multiple AI models that are different, you result in better solutions. The same is true of people. Like, but if you don't allow someone to bring that to the table, then you're not going to get good answers. And so as much as for me, it's about like feeling like I can build an environment with our team where they can be happy to show up at work. Like, it's not pure altruism. The work is better as a result of building a culture where people can show up and you're tolerating differences of opinion.
Yeah. Can you share some examples of the work that that's resulted in? You mentioned Hinge there, but I know you work with a lot of different clients.
Yeah, I mean, the WNBA work is one that I go back to because I was like, I didn't work on it myself. I just got to observe from the outside how impressive the team that ran that project was. Like, the WNBA, both the league and the fans are like largely queer, women of color. Like, we're not being represented in the media or by the league in ways that were, showing like who they were as people. They're the most educated professional sports league in the world. They have almost like high 90s graduation rate. Like, everyone has a bachelor's degree. And part of that process of bringing it in was building a team that was like queer, women of color, like all women. Like, when we did the shoot for the launch video, or when we designed the new identity and the typeface, like, we used a female-owned type foundry. Like, the DP and craft services and everyone at the shoot were all women. And like, bringing these people together, where like even just in that environment of that team, we were building a culture where we were teaching the clients how to respect the league and their players and their fans, and the things that they did on the back end of that, like having like young women photographers do like the professional photo shoots for the players from like high school students. Like, all of those actions sort of start to feed out when you're like building it from culture. Culture is an algorithm that is self-perpetuating, that you don't have to constantly police and like update a process. It is self-perpetuating in a way where good things keep happening.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such a simple thing to have those voices around the table, but a lot of bigger agencies maybe don't think of it. When we spoke before, and you've touched on it a little bit there, you mentioned this idea of like empathy-driven business model. Can you just share a little bit about like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, it's easy to sort of write off some of these ideas that become trite and tropes. But at the end of the day, like, if you work on the client side or if you work in agency side, like, we're working with people. You're building for people. You're trying to understand people. And, if you're not able to sort of put yourself in someone's shoes, you're not going to be effective at what you do. Like, almost anything. Like, if you work in healthcare, if you can't be empathetic, it's not going to be effective. Same as if you work in software development. I've worked on major projects with major companies, like building new digital products. And when we talk to the engineers, when we're coming in, we're like, who are you designing for? And they're like, myself. And we're like, is that helpful? Do you, like with Waze, we're like, do you drive? And they're like, no, I don't own a car, but I'm designing for myself. And we're like, that doesn't seem like an effective way to build a new product. Yeah.
It's kind of table stakes, isn't it? And if you could give one piece of advice, to anyone in the audience who's trying to either build a brand or work with a client and make them more empathy-driven, regardless of whether they're trying to reach Gen Z or another demographic, what would your one piece of advice be?
Be fucking for real. I think it's so easy to have like the feeling. I mean, there's a reason I don't post much on social media, right? Like, to be under the spotlight and sort of be in a position where you feel like you're being scrutinized. Like Gen Z would say, don't perceive me. And I think you have to sort of put yourself out there right now in an authentic way. Like, that's not new, but I think the way in which it's being evaluated is different. And the expectation that you're showing up in a way where you're honest. I think what it gives you right now is a permission to be kind of weird. Like, if you look at the way that like Gen Z fashion is right now, or like AI slop, or the way that the memes are sort of like this like pursuit of like no context, like brain rot, all of these things. Like, there is room to be many things if you're like honest and committed to it.
Yeah, amazing. Well, that's amazing advice. Thank you so much, Joey. You've been brilliant. And thank you for listening. Thank you. Thanks.